Objective Edward.
Hello and welcome to HBTG, History Behind the Games. This series is not just to discuss the games, but to give some historical background behind them that may have influenced the game creation itself or parts of its development. Battlefield 1, a game put forth by DICE and Electronic Arts, which launched back in October of 2016. A game set in one of the deadliest wars in history, World War I, it does not follow one main character, but several. A first-person shooter, the game is generally fast-moving, but sets apart some time to try and focus on the human feelings during the conflict. Although the game has left out several experiences from different factions, especially any of those from the Central Powers, perhaps they'll come out in DLC like France and Russia. We'll talk about some of the inaccuracies that go along with any form of historical entertainment, but let's focus on what they got right. As mentioned, the campaign stories in the game focus on several main characters. Along with their stories, they mainly display the technology, the heroics, but also the physical and mental sacrifice of the troops. What can best summarize this point is the prologue, in which the player controls several different characters in an intense fight with a narration of the haunting effects of experiencing combat. The prologue's name, Storm of Steel, is actually the name of a memoir from a German officer, Ernst Junger. I hope I pronounced that correctly, and his accounts of World War I trench warfare. Also, World War I is one of the first wars where battle fatigue and shell shock began to be recognized as a legitimate affliction from combat. They were, of course, around for much longer, but for the sheer ferocity of World War I combat, convinced many that these were brought on not by cowardliness, but by the fighting itself.
Of a special unit with a different mission. Our task was to support Matteo's battalion. We were a proud unit. We changed the war for Italy. The Arditi.
It may come as a surprise to some players, but the game does have a campaign story and a few multiplayer kits that featured the use of body armor. Body armor was a real thing in World War I, however, the way it is used broadly in the game is false. Not to say that soldiers didn't use it, as it was used by shock troops, but body armor didn't really see a lot of use during the war. The reason why is that the armor weighed a lot, slowing the wearer down and making him an easy target. Now, armor could possibly take a few pistol rounds, but with powerful rifles, artillery shrapnel, and machine guns hitting it repeatedly, it wouldn't provide the most ideal, durable protection. So rather than use it, most soldiers just took their chances without it, being able to move around much faster.
We have lost Objective Edward.
DICE and EA did do their homework. Not only tanks are included in the multiplayer, but horses as well. Pro tip, shoot for the rider, not the horse. Cavalry was used at the beginning of World War I. The idea of a man on a horse making gallant knightly charges, and more importantly, scouting for enemy positions, was still alive and well, making horses a common sight on the field. That changed, however, with another World War I era invention that Battlefield uses, but strangely doesn't touch too much on: the machine gun. The cavalry ended up dying just as easily as infantry, making big, easy targets for the guns. World War I was the last time cavalry was used in major combat. Battlefield 1 uses a wide variety of tanks. Tanks began as a British invention in World War I, and as the campaign mentions, were unreliable a lot of the time. They did, however, make a huge difference when they did work, becoming armed forts that infantry could advance behind, safe from enemy gunfire. A secret weapon, they got the name tank to confuse any spies who might think the name was just referring to fuel or water-holding containers. The mission, Through Mud and Blood, illustrates the tank experience well when the player is inside the vehicle. Being cramped inside, with crews of varying skill, it was a crapshoot if the tank was going to work properly or not. The best use of these early tanks was when they were used en masse. Although both sides would eventually use tanks, the Entente powers would have the majority. The 369th Infantry Regiment, or the Harlem Hellfighters, were an all-black unit in the United States Army. However, at the time, there were no racially integrated units, meaning that High Command refused to place African American troops next to white troops in the trenches. Wanting to fight, they accepted the offer of the French army, who wanted to use them to replace their own troops, giving the French troops a much-needed break. So, under French command, the 369th finally got to see action. German soldiers eventually coined the name Harlem Hellfighters after tough fights with the unit on several occasions. The game itself is very fast-paced, with the action and player moving fluidly through the campaign and multiplayer maps. Now historically for the Western Front, that wasn't necessarily true for much of the time, as soldiers were usually stuck in the slow but deadly trench warfare. The Eastern Front, though, possessed tremendous movement compared to that of the Western Front, with Lawrence of Arabia and the Arab guerrilla resistance changing the nature of war in the East. The war moved fast and was fought over many different fronts, as depicted in the game. Although there was no killer train to escape, Battlefield does mention, briefly and only in the campaign however, the struggle of the Bedouin fight against the Turks. This fight would help to break the stalemate in the war and eventually lead to its conclusion. Well, that's our show. If you have any game recommendations or comments, please leave them in the space below. This is HBTG, and I'll see you next time.